Pianist or keyboardist? How would you identify yourself? Are you someone who plays just piano or just keyboard? Have you been on one side or the other and converted to the dark side? We're going to examine some of these questions and the struggle to take a pianist and turn them into a keyboardist. Coming up. Hi, my name's Todd, and this is the Learn About Music channel. If you're coming back, I really appreciate you coming here. As always, please subscribe, hit the like button, comment below. I want to interact with you, so please let me know that you're out there. And if you're new here, this is a video for what I call mere mortals, people who are just trying to either get information because you're curious or you're a developing musician and you want to know a wide range of topics about music. So we're going to talk about these things on these channels, and today is no different. Sometimes people will ask the question about keyboardists. Now, a keyboardist is someone who plays in a band, or perhaps they play in a larger organization. Sometimes keyboardists work in movie music and make their living that way. And then you have pianist. And what is a pianist? Most of the time when I use that term, I'm talking about somebody who's been classically trained. They've been trained to learn technique and to have facility, to learn style and many different styles. They are typically fantastic readers of sheet music, and they have a great sense of history of classical music and a lot of other styles too, pop music things, but primarily it's in that classical realm here. So that's how I would define a pianist. Now, I know some of you may beat me up over that because many pianists are much further than that, and some pianists do have some ability to improvise over chords and things, but by and large, when I talk about a pianist, I talk it in the most traditional sense, that they've been brought up with more of a classical education in how they approach playing piano. So why do I need to take the time to go ahead and differentiate a pianist from a keyboardist? Well, there's a struggle. And most of the time, that struggle is when you'll have somebody in a band or in some sort of an organization. It could be a church group, it could be a rock band, it could be a jazz group, it could be a larger group. And they'll ask a pianist to come in and take on the role of the keyboardist in this group. And I see this a lot in church music and church music bands. And you've got lots of traditional pianists who are in the congregation, and they say, "Oh yeah, well I could totally do that." And they have a classical approach to being a keyboardist inside the organization as they get asked to do this. So they get asked to be brought in, and immediately there are struggles for the pianists as they come in. Either the director of the group doesn't have the materials they need, specifically sheet music, or they'll become obstinate because they don't have sheet music and it's not completely outlined from beginning to end. They'll get very defensive about not having what they need to go ahead and do their role now that they're part of this group. So I ask the question again, are pianists keyboardists? And the simple answer to that question is that they are not. Many keyboardists are pianists because most of them have come from that realm, but they have made that transition to also be a keyboardist. It's very rare that a pianist is a keyboardist right out of their straight classical training. Now, they may share playing white keys and black keys, and that you execute playing the notes up and down with your fingers like you would on a piano. But from there, it becomes very, very different as a keyboardist. So what are some of those characteristics that really differentiate a pianist from a keyboardist? Well, number one, a pianist typically has never played in a rhythm section. In a typical modern rhythm section, that is bass, drums, and guitar. Those are the main three things that we would often see. And a modern rhythm section would also include a keyboard, but the way that those instruments play together is very unique, taking its roots from traditional jazz, having some elements of improvised music in it. Typically, pianists don't improvise. Now, there are times where pianists have done that and still do that, and they're taught that by some instructors. But by and large, when we talk about improvise, we're talking about creating unique individual parts that come from them to be put into a rhythm section environment type of music situation. And finally, pianists typically don't play off of chord charts. Now, chord charts are typically used in like a jazz background, and some worship team types environments, and they'll typically have chords, they'll have bar lines, sometimes they'll have a couple of main lines. They will call that a lead sheet. But for the most part, the part that the keyboardist is going to be played has to be improvised, and it is based around the chord chart that is provided to them by the director or whoever the leader of the group is. So what do keyboardists do that makes them very different from pianists? Well, number one, the thing that jumps out that's most obvious is that a keyboardist plays a keyboard. It is not a piano. Electronic musical keyboards or workstations have lots and lots of components to them. Many of them, and when we talk about a workstation or even just a straight electronic synthesizer, will have multiple sections with multiple sounds. Sometimes there'll be things such as a drum machine built in, sequencing, which means that they can sort of record the notes that are played inside the machine. They have the ability to take multiple sounds and layer them on top of each other. And there's a wide range of sounds that are available on that instrument. And because there's so many sounds on it, a keyboardist has to learn those sounds and how to play those sounds. They become a multi-instrumentalist in effect. They also need to be able to manipulate any of those sounds that are on the keyboard. So inside of most keyboards, they give you the ability to go ahead and edit or take the parameters, take the settings within that and change that sound so that it fits the setting that you're playing in. So you have to have the ability to edit the sounds on the keyboard. Also, typically one of the big hindrances, and it sort of distinguishes a keyboardist from a pianist, is that when you get invited to play into a group, often they will say, we want you to learn to play this song, here's the recording, listen to the recording, figure out the parts, figure out the sounds, and then come back and we'll go ahead and play that song. That can be very daunting if you haven't ever done that, especially if you're trying to go ahead and figure out what kinds of sounds the original keyboardists use and then adapt that to the keyboard, or in many cases, keyboardists have multiple keyboards. And so multiple keyboards is something that often helps a keyboardist to take on many different roles, all within the chair that you sit in as the keyboardist. As I mentioned a moment ago, a keyboardist really is somewhat of a multi-instrumentalist, and in being so, the keyboardist has to become a student of many sounds, a student of instruments and how they're used. Two of the main sounds that are used very, very liberally in most music across all styles is string sounds, pad sounds, electronic piano sounds. Those are the main ones that you hear a lot. And then there'll be lead type sounds too. These are typically called monophonic sounds, and you hear those a lot on the Moog synthesizers that were used back in the 70s, but they've been emulated by other keyboards since then. And finally, one of the biggest characteristic that a keyboardist has that separates them from a pianist is they have to realize that they are not a piano player when they're being a keyboardist. And what that means is that you have to separate yourself from playing with both hands all the time on the keyboard. You're not always playing keyboard parts, so you're not going to be playing a bass part with the left hand on the keyboard. You are going to be playing something that fits into a small group setting and sometimes in a larger group setting. You almost have to think like you're part of an orchestra. And inside of an orchestra, you may have 70 or 80 instruments that are in the orchestra. Each part plays something very distinctive, and they only play at certain times to go ahead and further the melodic development of whatever the song is. The same is the case as a keyboardist. You're no longer the pianist that is holding down rhythm with the left hand and all the harmony, and you play from beginning to the end. You're a keyboardist, and you have switched roles entirely. So I don't say this just to upset people and make people mad, because there's many fine pianists that are great. They're not anything less than a keyboardist, but they're just different. They're different types of roles, and maybe you've not been exposed to what some keyboardists, some ones that stand out, what they do, and maybe you need to study some of the things that they do. So there's the keyboardist Keith Emerson. He was part of a group called Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They did a lot of orchestral songs that had rock feel to them, and so they were a three-piece band, and Keith Emerson had 10 or 12 keyboards on stage with trumpets and strings and horns and all kinds of other things, and he was able to go ahead and create orchestral types of sounds with his keyboard. So he'd be one to take a look at. Another one would be Rick Wakeman from the band Yes, and he was very popular with the band Yes back in the 70s. He used the Moog synthesizer quite a bit, and it has a very distinctive synthesizer type sound, but he also had a whole circle of keyboards that were around him that had all kinds of different sounds, had a real impact on how keyboardists approach their instrument. Another very, very good keyboardist who's worked in LA for a long time is Steve Porcaro. Now, Steve Porcaro originally was a studio musician with and also played in the band Toto in the Los Angeles area. Well, a lot of people don't realize that himself and the other members of Toto played in many of the recordings you hear. I think between the 6 or 7 members that were in the group, they probably played on 10 or 20,000 recordings. Steve Porcaro, very, very good at being a keyboardist, adapting sounds and creating incredible textures that can be used in many different settings. There's also a keyboardist from the band The Dixie Dregs, a man named T. Lavitz, very good at what he did as well. And then finally, Jordan Rudess is a modern keyboard player. He's been with the band Dream Theater, and the things that he does on a keyboard are really pretty legendary. So you can check out those 5 guys, and I think you'll really see something about the way that these guys play that really differentiate them. All of these players are amazing players, and they have incredible physical ability on the keys themselves, but also in the understanding and the application of the keyboard and how to use that, which is really amazing. So the point being in this whole video that what I'm talking about is that I don't want people to feel like they're any less than a keyboardist, but if they want to move into that area where they're playing with other people, these are some things that are going to really take down some of the roadblocks for you from you feeling isolated or not understanding what the group is doing. And I would recommend that you can go out and find lots and lots of technique books, some explanations, some interviews with these keyboardists that I've mentioned that talk about how they approach playing the keyboard. So the question of the day, if you are somebody who's been observing keyboardists, or you are a keyboardist and you understand some of that distinction between being a piano player or a keyboard player, what of those characteristics have you observed? Let us know. Put those down in the comments below. And also, if you've liked this video today, please hit the like button, and I would really hope that you would go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We're going to be bringing you more and more content like this, and we will see you next time here on Learn About Music.